So the TKX comes standard with a guide tube, so you can use a clutch fork and a traditional style release bearing with a mechanical linkage or a cable or something of that nature. If you're wanting to convert over to an internal hydraulic release bearing system, which we feel is a much more modern system, has a better clutch pedal feel, constantly stays in adjustment because you don't actually have to mechanically adjust anything, this is the kit for you. Straightforward and very simple. We're going to start by removing the factory bearing retainer off the front of the transmission. For that, you're going to need a 1/2-inch socket and ratchet or an impact gun. Go to remove all 4 bolts. And we've had this one apart recently, but sometimes the bearing race will come out and it'll stay inside this housing. Sometimes it will stay inside the bore of the transmission. Either way, if it stays in, then you don't have to worry about it. If it stays inside of this, you're going to have to take it out so you can access these shims that also came out. So normally the shims would be inside of here, underneath the bearing race. So you're going to remove those shims, and that's all you need from that actual part. And you're going to just set this to the side. You're going to need your factory gasket as well. You're going to take the included bearing adapter that we've machined in-house. It is all new billet aluminum. You're simply just going to install your shims into the new bearing retainer. You can put your bearing race back into the case if it came out. You're going to place your shims in the new bearing retainer, and then you're also going to place your gasket back on your bearing retainer. Keep in mind that the gasket has a notch in it to line up with the notch in the bearing retainer, and it also has to be flipped in the right direction because the holes aren't a perfect bolt circle. They're meant to be offset. That way you can't put the notch in the wrong location because it is a notch for oiling. And something you can do to help keep the shims in place is to put a little grease on them, and then they won't want to fall out. We're not going to do that today because we like punishment. Same with the gasket. You put a little grease on the gasket, it's not going to fall down like you just saw. But if it does, it's easy enough to put back in place. So we do provide hardware because it does change to a different style bolt. We use a socket head screw for this. That's for clearance for the new slave cylinder. So they have a 1/4-inch socket head. The bolt itself is a 5/16 thread. So you're going to torque these to 28 foot-pounds. Okay. Once you have your new bearing housing installed, you can check the end play. If you find that you have excessive end play, we have shim kits available for these to set your end play. Tremex tolerance on end play is 1 to 5 thousandths. So once you have your new bearing housing on and you got your end play set, you can go ahead and install your release bearing without lines. Simply slips on. Again, hardware is included. Same hardware, 5/16 with a socket head. And it same 1/4-inch size drive on these bolts as well. So you can go ahead and install that. You're not going to fully tighten this yet because you may need to shim this for proper setup. And there's a link to a video on shimming right here. So once you have it to this point, now you can measure for your shim, make sure that you've got your engagement depth correct. And once you're to that point, now you can install the bell housing on the transmission. And then once you have the bell housing installed, you can connect the lines. And the line kit that comes with this assembly is going to be 2 fittings that screw into the base itself. And the reason that you want to install these after you've installed the bell housing is because the bell housing registers on the bearing retainer itself. And that's what centers the transmission up in the bell housing. So if you put those lines on now, the bell housing won't slide over all this assembly. So you have to put the bell housing on, and then you can connect your lines. This is the Lakewood bell housing for hydraulics. It just has an opening for the hydraulic lines themselves to come out of, and this is the one that we recommend with this system. But you can see that it simply just slips over the assembly and then bolts up, and that's how it locates. So now that your bell housing is installed, you can take your lines and you can connect those there long enough to lead outside the belt housing. It comes standard with an 8-inch speed bleeder, meaning you can bleed this yourself without having to have any help. It's going to attach to the top port, and it's going to exit the belt housing and then attach to the top port of the release bearing. And then your feed line, you're going to use the 45 side. That's going to connect to the release bearing on the bottom port, and then it's also going to exit the belt housing in the same place. And then on the outside of the belt housing, you can make your connections to the rest of your hydraulic system. So that's everything you need to know about how to install the TKX release bearing system. Thanks for watching.